Hello, this is Chris Claremont. You're watching Mr. Media.
I'm Bob Andelman, and this is Mr. Media Interview. You can see, hear, and read more than 1,000 of my previous celebrity interviews at MrMedia.com. That's mrmedia.com. Subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Alexa Podcasts, or Stitcher, and follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And if you like the show, please tell the world with a 5-star review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. On today's show, I'll talk to comic book writer Chris Claremont, the man generally credited as father of the modern X-Men, and inspiration for all of the Fox X-Men films and TV shows. He's now the subject of a film himself, the documentary Chris Claremont's X-Men, directed by Patrick Meany. This is Chris's second appearance on Mr. Media. Stick around. Most people are tickled when a Wikipedia page appears and points out their career highlights. But what if Wikipedia had 200 individual pages, each devoted to a fictional character created by a single person? Now, I'm not referring to Stan Lee, the godfather of Marvel Comics, either. Nope, the man with these 200 Wikipedia pages to his credit, everyone from Gambit and Cable to Kitty Pryde, Strong Guy, and the New Mutants, is Chris Claremont, father of the modern X-Men comics, films, cartoons, and TV series. And now, filmmaker Patrick Meany is expanding the Claremont legend even further with a new documentary, Chris Claremont's X-Men. It includes extensive interviews with Claremont, as well as several of the artists and writers and editors who worked with him during more than 30 years in Marvel's X-Universe. These include Jim Shooter, Ann Nocenti, Louise Simonson, Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri, and many more. You can watch Chris Claremont's X-Men wherever video on demand is available. And this is Chris's second visit to Mr. Media. Chris Claremont, welcome back to Mr. Media.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Great to see you. So a guy calls you up, I'm just guessing here, but a guy calls you up and says, I want to do a documentary about your career. What's your initial response to something like that?
Pull the other one.
It's a little much, right?
It's a matter of perspective. From his outside looking in, it makes perfect sense. It's a large chunk of my career. It's one of the longest sequential writing arcs in comics, the better part of 2 decades, and it coincides with that work being focused on a series that, for all intents and purposes, had no history. The material in that run pretty much had to be generated out of whole cloth and integrated into the sadly limited backstory that the X-Men provided to, at the time, Len Wein and Dave Cockrum rebooted it, and then I came in to write it an issue later. Mm-hmm. But for me, that's merely one stop on a journey that's still going on. So when someone comes in and says, we like to celebrate this part of your creative life, aside from the fact that, like any writer, there's the ego boost side that goes, wow, they like me, they really like me. There's the other side that goes, why? What did I do? I sit in a room typing all day. So it took a little getting used to. On the other hand, the actual part of the program that I was involved in was a lot of fun and a cheap excuse to get together with some dear old friends.
I had to ask you that. Just by weird coincidence, several years ago, I was working on a biography of Will Eisner, and Andrew Cook and John B. Cook were in his life at the same time doing the documentary Portrait of a Sequential Artist. And I recall that Will and Ann, his wife at the time, had dealt with that with equal parts excitement and nervousness. It's like, these people are going to be in our lives. I mean, Bob's over there just writing down whatever we say, but these guys are they're filming everything we do. You know, now for an artist, it's one thing because you can, a director can shoot him drawing or can put on screen things that he's drawn. Were you nervous that it was going to be 70 minutes of you sitting at a keyboard?
Well, I wasn't sitting at a keyboard. I was sitting on a couch.
Right. No, I've seen it.
Talking, and I like to talk. But I don't know if you've seen the film Trumbo.
I have not, actually, no.
Oh, well, it's the life of Dalton Trumbo.
Bryan Cranston.
Screenwriter Dalton Trumbo. I was thinking, you know, if this sort of fan interest had occurred and the ability to live chat had existed, what could they have done with a writer whose professional life was basically built around, I sit in the bathtub with a tray in front of me and write while I soak and drink whiskey? I don't know whether the audience would find that enticing, horrifying, titillating, but that was the way he got his work done. We all have our idiosyncrasies, but as I said, as writers, we generally work in a little box. We close the door. For example, Marv Wolfman's habit for writing was he would go into his office, close the door, and he was not to be disturbed from 9 to 5, his home office, because that was his job. He went to his job, he did his job, he came home and then became a civilized, socially interactive human being. Neil Gaiman, for example, used to, back in the day, rent or buy a new place, a hut in the woods, and would really cool hut, really cool woods, but he would go out and buy something and go work there for the 6 months it would take him to write his next novel. We all have our idiosyncrasies, our ways of dealing with the craft and the needs of both the creative needs of generating the story and the practical needs of, holy crap, we have to hit a deadline. In comic book terms, especially Marvel terms, especially xMen terms, the ability to go to take refuge in a hut in the woods wasn't practical because we had to generate a script every 9 days. Mm-hmm. So, and back when I started, there was no FedEx, there was no faxing, there was no email. You typed the script, you went into Marvel, you delivered the script, you got paid, you went to the bank, you prayed the check wouldn't bounce, or your checks wouldn't bounce in the time it took for Marvel's check to clear, mm-hmm. and that was that. So
I have to ask you, since you referred to these other writers, where, let's say in the late 70s and 80s, where were you physically writing, and how did that change over the years? Where, you know, did you always write at home? Did you ever work write in an office?
I started out at Marvel working in the office. My first exposure to them when I was in university, they call them interns now. Back then I was a gopher. Mm-hmm. In the classic sense, go for coffee, go for this, go for that. But Marvel in the classic sense was not much bigger than I keep thinking the floor of my house, the footprint of my house. There were maybe 24 people working in the office then. Hmm. And that, Stan, Roy Thomas, John Romita Sr., Herb Trimpe, Frank Giacoia, Marie Severin, that was the bullpen. Mm-hmm. Mari Kuramoto and some others in doing work in, I guess, the tech side of things, the stat machines, the Xeroxes, and a secretary and a couple of, grunt like me.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't room for other people. So it was a growth experience from the beginning.
And when did you switch from writing in the office to...
Well, you have to understand, I mean, as an assistant editor, when I came back to work for Marvel as an assistant editor, I was paid $140 a week.
Ooh.
Hey.
It's good money then.
Living in, I had an apartment in Manhattan that was $115 a month, which I wanted to bet there was a better apartment in the Village, but it was $135, and I couldn't afford it. Not on my salary.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived on the Upper West Side for about 2 years. Then I moved up to the way Upper West Side in Inwood. Lived on Park Terrace East, or 218th Street, for, a decade. And then got married and moved out of Manhattan altogether.
Well, let me come back to
sorry.
No, sorry.
The punchline of this is, aside from the beginning and the late middle, I rarely worked in the office. Those 2 times were when I was in editorial. Basically because the whole essence of Marvel was you were freelancers, or you were creative. Your work was at home. The bullpen fixed things, but as soon as John's the wrong person to use as an example, John Romita, because he was art director and his wife Virginia was production manager for the better part of the 80s into the 90s. So they were helping run the show from the start, at least from the start of my experience with them.
Well, I was gonna say, I wanted to bring you back to the subject of the documentary itself. I assume, since you're here talking to me, that you're happy with the way it turned out.
What's not to be happy about?
Okay, it's a fun documentary. One of the things that I really liked about it was the cosplay elements, where we have cosplayers. Maybe they're just actors, but they seem like it could be cosplayers in dressed as Storm or Logan, for example. Acting kind of interstitials between topics and that kind of thing. It seemed like a great way to illustrate. We were talking about how would you illustrate a writer at work. That was a pretty nice transitions.
Yeah, I had no problem with that.
Yeah.
It's always nice to look at one's characters brought to life. I think the disconcerting reality is both the people themselves as drawn versus people as they actually look can sometimes be an interesting contrast. And that costumes that work on the printed page, especially depending on the artist who's presenting them, can be quite daringly different than costumes actually worn by a person who, has to walk down the street, step up, climb a set of stairs, perform all amount of physical activities, fighting, whatever. I think you see the same sort of balance and challenge being addressed in how the characters are brought to life in venues as alternative as Justice League versus Avengers. You look at how many different iterations Batman's gone through since Burt Ward and Adam West.
How do you feel when you see, because you've now seen probably more characters that you've worked on translated to the screen than almost anyone, maybe Stan.
Translated by some of the best actors in the business, which is a remarkable compliment, and one I never fail to be incredibly grateful for.
Is it always interesting the first time you see that character brought to life in flesh and in a costume and it's up on the screen? Because you're probably seeing it before most people.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
But I mean, I first saw Ian McKellen perform when I was a young punk and an ambitious actor. So I would go, he would come to New York and do 6 weeks of a one-man show called Acting Shakespeare, where it was literally a master class in the craft of acting Shakespeare. And it was wonderful. You know, spend $15, stand up in the back of the balcony and with a long lens camera and take notes. And if one was lucky and he hung around after the show, you came down and asked questions. To meet him, oh, crikey, 40 years later, now, God, 50, never. But to meet him and say, well, at the launch party for xMen on Governor's Island, I'm standing there with my wife, and it's like, oh my God, it's Ian McKellen, oh my God. And she said, oh, will you just go say something? And I went over and said, Sir Ian, hi, I'm your biggest fan. Dear boy, thank you for those wonderful words. I'm going, I'm sorry, what? If it were not the character that you built, I would not have anything to do. And I'm going, wow, I am so like. And then he says, have you met Hugh? Hugh, come over, please. It's like, holy cow. Hi. Hello. You're Hugh Jackman. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, you know, this is the sort of thing that kind of makes all the BS worth it. Mm-hmm. It's like you're sitting there and I'm standing with my kid hero. Or as I said, you know, as I said in passing, please don't take this the wrong way, but I got to be gay for about 18 hours now. Just to talk to him.
Right.
To Ian. But to see the characters that I have worked on my professional life, that in many cases I've created, brought to life by actors whose work I respect tremendously. I mean, it never would have occurred to me to cast Peter Dinklage as Bolivar Trask, but holy cow, mm-hmm. that was such the right thing to do. You know. On the other hand, being a writer and being not the most socially adept person, I'm also the guy who on set in Toronto looking at Hugh and saying, oh my God, Hugh, I saw you and Halle Berry in, this kind of not bad crime drama with...
I know what you're thinking of.
Yeah, where it's all about bank robbery
right.
and hacking. Hugh Jackman as a hacker, that I thought was really cool. But it's like, you know, you two are so cool together. Wouldn't it be great? I mean, you came out of Song and Dance. You won the Olivier for Oklahoma. Wouldn't it be great if you and Halle could just throwaway moment in Days of Future Past? You could have a dance moment, a song. And he looks at me and goes, no. And of course, comic book writers being so socially adept, I go, oh, no, really, trust me, it would be the most remarkable thing. And suddenly the claws are in his hand, and I don't know where it came from. I guess they just went snicked and came out. And he goes, no! And there's a way Hugh Jackman says no, where he seems to be about, instead of 6 feet tall, 6 meters tall. And the Australian part of him is like, look, boy, I've been pumping my arms for 6 weeks on this show. I am roughly the size of the World Trade Tower. Don't argue with me. And it's like, nope, no more arguing at all, sir. So, but this is, you know, these are moments that in a weird way wouldn't have happened. Well, not a weird way at all. They wouldn't have happened without the xMen.
Well, maybe that's
really kind of cool. And here's the other one. It's a parenthetical aside.
Sure.
Way back in the day, Jim Shooter and I and a bunch of other people were sitting around the office spitballing because I was writing Marvel Team Up. And we got to find something to do in this book. What could we do that's never been done before? I mean, which characters? And we don't want to do Multiple Man, and we don't want to do this, and we don't. What would be interesting? And I said, you know, it'd be really stupid, but the most cool thing, what? Why don't we guess? Wouldn't it be fun to guest star the Not Ready for Primetime Players? And Jim looks at me and says, so call them and ask. What? Call them and ask. Call who? The Not Ready for Primetime Players. They're TV. Yeah. We're comics. Yeah. They wouldn't talk to us. How do you know? Well, they wouldn't. Why don't you give it a try? Really? Take the phone, Claremont, do it. So I went over, called NBC, got Lorne Michaels' office, and said, hi, this is Chris Claremont from Marvel Comics. I write a book called Marvel Team Up. We were wondering if you guys would be at all interested in guest starring the Not Ready for Primetime Players with Spider-Man in an issue of our comic. And there was this pause, and the voice of the other said, who is this? And I said, Chris Claremont. And you are with what? Marvel Comics? Marvel who? Marvel Comics? Okay, we'll get back to you. Okay. So I turned back. Jim says, how did it go? And I said, might not have worked. 5 minutes later, his phone rings. Picks it up. It's the receptionist. Yes, this is Jim Shooter. It's Lorne Michaels' office. I said, they want to know, is there anyone working for him called? Oh, yeah, Chris Claremont. He's sitting right across my desk. We're talking issues of Marvel Team Up, and we were spitballing an idea. Would you guys like to guest star your guys with Spider-Man for an issue? So, long story short, 6 weeks later, I'm writing Spidey meets the Not Ready for Primetime Players. We had releases from everybody. It was the second season. Nobody knew what the show was except it was cool. We called, they answered, we cut the deal, boom. 3 months later, the issue comes out. I get a call. Jim Shooter says, how quickly can you be in the audience? Be in the office? And I said, I don't know. I'm, just sitting around working. Why? John Belushi's going to be here in 30 minutes. I'll be there in 20. I got dressed, got a cab, rocketed downtown, walked in the office. 3 minutes later, in comes John Belushi. And it's like, you're John Belushi. Oh, my God. And he's going, you're Marvel Comics. Oh, my God. And it's like, wait, no. You're John Belushi. And he's going, you're Marvel Comics. And it's like, wow. Good drugs. It's like Dave Cockrum's wife comes in, takes one look at him, grabs up a metal yardstick, and then instantly starts doing samurai. And so he instantly starts doing samurai back to her. And, they're playing with it. So John, we're just talking, and he like puts his hand on my shoulder and says, it was really good. And I said, your story was really good. And I said, oh, John, thank you. Thank God. You have no idea how hard it is to write comedy. He gives me this look like, are you an a-hole or what? And Shooter reaches over, pats me on the head and says, don't worry, John, we only let him out on limited occasions. And then something clicks. Maybe you should look at the credits at the end of the show, twerp. Because Belushi was writing like a third of the show along with everybody else in the cast. So it was incredibly cool. And the next thing we knew, he invited us to come to the premiere of Animal House, which was opening that weekend. Mm-hmm. And, of course, they'd sold out Radio City Music Hall, so there was no way we could get in. So he said, you want to come to the opening night party? So we all went down to the opening night party of Animal House and had a grand old time just giving out original art to Gilda Radner and Belushi and everybody. It was the best thing ever. But that was what the industry was like then. That was what made it so much fun, is the connections you could draw, the people you could run into, the the serendipitous moments of delight and wonder. And it was the same with xMen. You know, in that case, it was like 20 years later, and actually meeting people on the set, you know, Stan and I got to sit down for an hour with James Cameron and almost pitch the xMen to him. That was cool. That was wonderful. You know, these are the links that Marvel and these characters and this world provided for those of us who were lucky enough to be in it. And it's still going strong today.
Chris, did your experiences as a fan, you know, in these cases, Belushi, Ian McKellen, Hugh Jackman, did that affect your view on, you know, going to the comic book conventions, for example, and the fans coming up to you? Did you see them a little differently, having gone through your own fan moments?
I think it led to the evolving I guess, bedrock thought of my life, which is don't be an asshole. You know, it's the realization, the understanding, the acceptance of the fact you wouldn't be here if not for them. Mm-hmm. And trust me, I've been to a lot of conventions where one can see creators who have, the tide has changed, the path of the river has changed. And while they have fans and people who are interested, it's a quieter reality. The amazing, breathtaking, sort of unbelievable reality or aspect of the xMen is that each generation seems to discover the work on its own and enjoy it. You cannot treat that with disrespect. You cannot treat that by taking it for granted, by dismissing it. They are here because of the work I've done. Therefore, if the work is worth it, they are more than worth it, because without them, it's just words on paper.
Well, speaking of being worth it, there's one more area I want to bring up with you before we have to go. I think by now most people assume that because you're attached in different ways to the films or the TV series, that you're being compensated in a way that wouldn't have been dreamed of 30 or 40 years ago in comics. Is that?
No.
Which part are you laughing at? That it wouldn't have been dreamed of, or that you're not being compensated?
Oh, no. 30, 40 years ago, we had... Technically, they're called incentives. Back then, it was royalties. And trust me, that the weekend that we got the numbers for xMen 1, we were all sitting around kind of going, what the? Wow.
Yeah.
We are real now. So anyway, what was your question?
Well, I mean, 40-some years ago, I remember Neil Adams was going to bat for Siegel and Schuster on Superman to get them paid something. And Bob Kane got some money on Batman on a regular basis. But it was still the exception rather than the norm to have that happen. And you probably, when you
I don't think it's... I would... It may be incrementally better now, but I would... Anyway, sorry, finish your question. I shouldn't have jumped in.
No, that's okay. Well, and the example I was thinking of is, okay, so the xMen films have been going now for 10 or 15 years, I guess. I've known, not real personally, but I've known Tony Isabella's story with Black Lightning. And he had no opportunity to get creator rights or royalties on that for years and years. He kept fighting. And I kept thinking, all the years I kept thinking, well, good for you, but I also thought, well, what's the value of Black Lightning ever going to be? It was never a big character when it came out, and now we're 3 weeks into it being this critic's darling as a TV series. But does it take for TV or film?
I would hope Tony is being adequately compensated for it.
Well, and that's what I hope so as well. I'm going to speak to him in a few days, which is why I thought I'd ask about this. But does it take TV or film to express interest in a comics character for the creative people who may have worked on it over the years or been creative?
Well, you have to see, the devil, unfortunately, is with the details. I was a vice president and editorial director at Marvel back in '98 when we first started negotiating with Lauren and Fox for xMen. I wrote. Actually, Fox was ready to put it in turnaround because they couldn't find a way to make it work to their satisfaction until I wrote a memo outlining a way it could, or at least the way I saw it that it could, that apparently catalyzed some assessment or evaluation or vision of it in both Fox and Bryan Singer that enabled him to embrace it and then Fox to embrace him, and we're off and running. But Marvel at that point in time was in bankruptcy. The deal that was cut with Fox to do the license was extremely favorable to the Murdochs, but not to Marvel. So the X Pantheon and the FF Pantheon have always had a different relationship with the comics creators than, for example, the Avengers Pantheon, which was generated through Marvel. And the fact of Marvel's eventual acquisition by Disney put things in a whole different light. Suddenly we were rival film companies as opposed to just neighbors. Mm-hmm. So the last, I guess, 10 years, xMen has been very appreciated in-house or recognized in-house. In spite of its, well, I suspect the success of the comic is the only thing that's been keeping it front and center, whereas other titles like the FF have been discontinued. How that might change in the next few years, we'll have to wait and see. But the sad fact is that Warner's has a different approach towards creators, perhaps because of the Siegel-Schuster experience and the Bob Kane experience, than Marvel does. They are much more apparently appreciative. I know in terms of film, derivative film material, Len has done extremely well, Marv has done well, I assume George has done well. Marvel is a more traditional venue in those regards, where the balance is very much more in favor of the company than it is in terms of acknowledging any creator contribution. The rationale being that there have been so many creators over the course of time and so many. How do you differentiate A from B from C? The X-Men, for better or worse, is the exception that proves the rule. On the other hand, Legion, one of the things that made my heart jump from the first episode was the fourth credit of the opening crawl, where you see star, writer, director, created by. Mm-hmm. And it was like, holy cow. Bill and I are on, wow, big names at the front of the show, not the back of the show.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that carries through to New Mutants, whether that carries through to Days of Future Past, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But the problem is that publishing, especially comics publishing, is a business. And very, very rarely do businessmen do things out of the kindness of their heart. Even if they agree on the premise, which isn't always the case. That said, none of us ever got into this with any illusions. That's why when people say, "Well, if I could go back in time and fix something about the xMen," there's my immediate answer, and then there's a politically correct answer. But that's the way it is.
All right. Well,
that said, the X-Men has been the best-selling comic in the American market. Well, when I was on it, it was that way for 10 consecutive years, except when Frank and I were duking it out. Him on Daredevil, me on X-Men.
Frank Miller.
Yeah. Sorry.
All right.
It's been a mainstay of Marvel's publishing for the better part of a half century. What a lot of people don't recall as often as they should is that X-Men was the movie that broke the bank in terms of Hollywood's perception of what superheroes could do. Fox thought we would be that our earnings would be on a par with Punisher or Blade. So they figured maybe 50, 60 million and out. And they came in with an opening weekend of 100 million, just barely shy of $100 million. And suddenly, wow, with a no-name cast. I mean, you have to what you have to realize is we look back on X-Men 1 now and think, wow, that's a cast. Well, yes, it is. But go back to 1998 when everybody was being cast. And it's like, well, Ian McKellen, he's really famous in London on stage. Okay, Patrick Stewart. Okay, he's the name. He did Picard for 9 years. Okay, he's our guy. Anna Paquin, well, she won an Oscar as a 6-year-old.
Right. The piano.
For the piano.
Yeah.
So she's the quality name in this. Halle Berry, she's gorgeous, but she's Halle Berry. What the hell? You run down the list of people. Rebecca Romijn, Ben Stamos. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's gorgeous, but nobody was A-list.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in terms of quality of their work and potential, you betcha. Oh, yeah. And Doug Ray Scott, well, he broke his ankle riding motorcycles in Australia. So we'll get this other guy. Hugh, what's his name? Yeah. What's he done? Well, he won the Best Actor Award, the Olivier, in London. For what? Curly in Oklahoma. Oh, so he's a musical comedy guy. Whoa, what's he going to do? There's a bright golden claw on the desert. Logan by way of Oklahoma. So you look at it in that opening week of filming, and there's a lot of potential, but there's nothing that makes you go, wow. Except by the time we got around to releasing the film, Halle Berry had just won Best Actress for Monsters Ball. Hugh Jackman was the hottest thing since sliced bread. Ian McKellen, he was involved in this fantasy film in New Zealand about rings. Suddenly everybody's looking at it and going, we got a lot of... And by the time the film came out, X-Men had one of the hottest casts going. Mm-hmm. And it only got better after that. So, and yes, I am looking at it from a totally prejudiced and proprietary aspect. And there are, I'm sure, much more rational explanations for all of this. But as far as I'm concerned, my characters, it was so damn cool. It was unbelievable. And it sort of lit the fuse for Iron Man and Spider-Man and so on. And indeed, Kevin Feige came out of Lauren's, brain trust. So you could almost say X-Men's not only responsible for comic book films, they're responsible for Kevin and Marvel films. So that's being entirely solipsistic. But I don't care.
Hey, you're entitled. You're entitled. If anyone's entitled, you're entitled.
The point is that it's an evolutionary thing. You could look at the X-Men by Stan and Jack and think, "Oh, this is nice." Then you look at it by Werner Roth and, not so nice. And wait, there are a couple of issues that were the
Neil Adams.
No, the 3 parts that introduced Lorna were done by Jim Steranko.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Which were cool. And then you had Neil's issues. But they were little bits and pieces along the way. And then suddenly Dave came on as artist. Len came on to create them. I came on as writer, and things suddenly lit fire. And then Dave gave way to John Byrne, and the fire got more intense. And then Dave came back after John, and the fire got more intense. And then Paul Smith came in, and we were heading for the moon. It's just one of those cool things. It was the right characters, the right creators, the right place, the right time. And I think the same holds true for movies. You look at, for me, I look at Days of Future Past and I think, this is, it's John's and my story, but it's the best cast here. I mean, Ellen Page as Kitty, yeah, that's cool. The more they do, the better it gets. And I think if that's what one can say best about any concept. The more you come back to it, the more work they do, the better the work becomes, the more interesting the characters become, the more exciting the stories become. And from me as audience perspective, then the sky's the limit. Shoot for it. I want to see what happens when the Shi'ar show up, or reasonable facsimile thereof. I want to see what happens with Jean. I want to see what happens, I don't know, with Mr. Sinister. There's so much good stuff that's mine. There's good stuff that other people did too, but I don't, as far as the X-Men is concerned, I am entirely prejudiced.
Last question, are you excited about Disney acquiring the X-Men films and 20th Century Fox and what that could mean to changing the universe and giving the X-Men even more play?
Ask me in 5 years, I'll let you know.
All right.
No,
I'll do that.
I am happy because I am, for better or worse, a Marvel partisan. I'm happy that the kids are home. I'm happy because the opportunity exists now to integrate the publishing and the licensing and the film under one roof. I'm intrigued to see what happens next. I think the only caveat I ever have at this point in discussions like these is that deep down in my heart of hearts, there is a part of me that has that moment. The moment of regret was 1991, where we couldn't find a way to make it. You know, as Bob Harris said to me 2 years later, it's like, if only I'd known. You know, if we'd known that Jim and company were going to walk out and form Image a year later, would we have made the decisions we made? But who knows if that would have led to a better outcome? It just would have led to a different outcome. But we can't do that. Although I can fantasize alternate dimensions as long as I like and play it. So for me, I'm just going to enjoy the ride as it goes, as it happens, and appreciate the fact that the characters I created, the stories I wrote, are being brought to life by people whose work and craft and talent I have immense respect for. And like anyone else sitting in the audience, I look forward to what happens next. I mean, as grown up and mature as I like to pretend to be, the moment in Wolverine where Hugh looks at Silver Shadow, his girlfriend, and says, "You don't understand. I'm the best there is at what I do. But what I do best isn't very nice." And next thing Beth knows, I'm jumping up at the screening theater and yelling, "Yes!" Because that's my line.
It is.
Hugh said, you know, he was on that screen and he said my signature line for his character. And I thought, okay. I confess, I'm a writer. I am now happy.
Well, folks, listen, you can see Patrick Meany's new documentary, Chris Claremont's X-Men, wherever video on demand is available. And Chris, you've got your website. It's chrisclaremont.com, I believe.
Yep.
Are you on social media, Twitter, Facebook, any of those places?
Much to my wife's dismay, yes.
Okay.
It's on Facebook.
All right. Folks can look you up there. Chris, it was a great pleasure to talk to you again. I know we ran a little long, but I am so grateful. I feel like, I don't know, Chris Claremont meeting Ian McKellen again. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining us on Mr. Media today.
The pleasure was mine. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience full of evolutionary mutants whose only powers are the ability to defy the laws of personal hygiene in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida.
Hi, this is Rich Scheidner. And if you've ever wondered what it was like to be a stand-up comedian in the 1980s, I'm going to do you a big favor. Instead of billions of dollars for a time machine, you can just spend $24.95 and buy my new book, Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 1980s Comedy Boom. It will save you money and give you thrills. It will take you there. Go to my website, richscheidner.com, go to amazon.com, and buy this book.